Today, we are undertaking a pretty critical mission heading hundreds of miles above Earth to analyze the infrastructure that really defines our modern existence.
It really does.
We're talking about the space domain. This is the engine room for our telecommunications, for global positioning, for climate monitoring.
And, if you rely on GPS to find your coffee shop, or you use a cell phone, or frankly, if you care about the sustainability of climate science, you need to understand that this entire system, this incredible benefit, is currently facing, well, a truly existential threat from the debris we've left behind.
That's the core tension we're diving into today. And for this deep dive, we've synthesized a massive stack of sources. We're talking specialized reports from organizations like the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, the IADC.
Right, and also detailed legal analyses of those old Cold War treaties and some really new government consultations, particularly focusing on what's coming out of the United Kingdom, which is pretty cutting edge.
It really is.
So our mission today is to move past the simple headlines about, space junk. We need to grasp how critical the threat is right now, how these antique legal frameworks are just fundamentally failing to cope with the surge of commercial actors.
All the new constellations?
All the new constellations, and most importantly, what concrete technical and regulatory solutions, things like active debris removal or ADR, and on-orbit satellite servicing, OOS, what's being developed to save Earth orbit from itself. This is really about ensuring the sustainability of the final frontier.
And to start, I think we have to establish the scale of this mess with some numbers that are, frankly, genuinely unsettling. When we talk about space pollution, it's so far beyond just a few broken satellites.
It really is.
So what are the key statistics that define the urgency of this moment?
Okay, let's start with what we can actually see. The space surveillance networks, they actively track about 21,000 human-made objects larger than 10 centimeters.
Okay, so 10 centimeters, that's roughly the size of a softball.
It's exactly a softball. And those are the objects we monitor daily, the ones we actively try to dodge.
But the real risk, as I understand it, often comes from the objects we can't track reliably.
That's it. The sheer volume of the smaller, high-velocity hazards is terrifying. Estimates suggest there are at least 450,000, maybe up to 600,000 objects measuring between 1 and 10 centimeters.
Wow.
And then you have the truly overwhelming population. Hundreds of millions of objects measuring between 1 millimeter and 1 centimeter. And you have to remember, at orbital speeds, that 1 millimeter paint fleck can deliver the force of a hand grenade.
It's just incredible kinetic energy. And when you lay those numbers out, it sounds like Earth orbit is already crowded. But here is the most impactful statistic we found, the one that I think should define our entire conversation about resource management up there.
Of that 21,000 human-made objects larger than 10 centimeters, the ones that are actively cataloged, our sources indicate that only about 6 to 7% are operational satellites.
6 to 7%. Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
That means 93% of the large objects we are actively tracking are essentially space junk. They are dead satellites, old rocket bodies, or fragments from past explosions and collisions.
Think about the resource allocation involved in that. We are currently spending billions of dollars and using immense computing power for what we call space situational awareness, just to track useless pollution.
All to keep that tiny 6% fraction of functional assets safe.
Exactly, to keep them operational. That imbalance alone, that 93% junk figure, confirms that the status quo is completely, utterly unsustainable.
So let's transition from just the volume of debris to the inherent danger of speed. Because it's not the size of the objects that's the primary threat, is it? It's the kinetic energy they possess.
That's the crux of it, absolutely. The average velocity of objects in low Earth orbit, what we call LEO, it ranges between 3 kilometers per second and 7.7 kilometers per second. Now, if you have two objects moving in opposing directions...
A head-on collision.
A head-on collision, you get a relative speed of up to 11.7 kilometers per second.
Which, for you listening, if you're trying to translate that into terrestrial terms, is over 26,000 miles per hour. That's why we call these hypervelocity impacts.
And when an impact happens at that speed, the consequences are, well, they're devastating. You don't get a dent. You get total destruction. The materials literally vaporize, creating this massive cloud of shrapnel, and all of that shrapnel is now traveling at those same immense speeds. So a collision between two operational satellites is bad, but a collision between any uncontrolled object and another spacecraft creates a self-perpetuating disaster.
And it makes sense that this danger is most concentrated in the most desirable neighborhoods of space, right? The debris is piling up where we want to be.
Correct. We focus on the most useful Earth orbits. LEO, which is below 2,000 kilometers, MEO, or medium Earth orbit, and GEO, geostationary orbit, which is gay up there at about 36,000 kilometers.
And LEO is the biggest worry right now.
A LEO is the region of greatest concern for uncontrolled debris growth, specifically because of the density of all these new constellations being deployed there. This is where most communication satellites and Earth observation missions operate.
But those high-value assets in GEO, they're not safe either, even if they're much further away.
Not at all. GEO is sometimes called the geosynchronous graveyard, which is where assets are supposed to be moved at the end of their lives. And while the spatial density of debris is lower than in LEO, GEO still has approximately 1,000 tracked debris objects larger than 1 meter.
The meter is huge.
It's huge, and because GEO satellites are often stationary relative to the Earth, they offer a very predictable target. On top of that, the velocity decay from atmospheric drag is virtually zero at that altitude. So any debris that reaches GEO stays there for millennia.
And this isn't just theoretical modeling. I mean, we have historical precedents, major collisions that serve as these grim warnings of the cascade effect. We've had 3 major events that really define the current risk level.
The first noted incident, way back in 1996, was a perfect illustration of the long memory of space debris. The French military reconnaissance satellite, it was called Cerise, was struck by a fragment.
And that fragment, it wasn't a meteor or something, right? It was our own stuff coming back to haunt us.
Exactly. It wasn't a natural object. It was a piece of a third stage of an Ariane rocket that had exploded almost a decade earlier. This collision just demonstrated that debris created decades ago can maintain its viability as a threat, showing how patient and persistent this problem is.
Then the second event in 2007 was not accidental at all, and it dramatically changed the risk profile for everyone.
That was the very controversial anti-satellite, or ASI, missile test conducted by China. They deliberately destroyed one of their old weather satellites, creating an instantaneous massive source of new pollution.
How much did it add?
That single event added approximately 3,000 large, trackable pieces of debris to LEO. It raised the baseline risk for every single operator globally, and it just fundamentally altered the long-term debris environment for the worse.
But the event that truly crystallized the threat, especially for the commercial sector, happened in 2009.
The 2009 Iridium Cosmos collision. This was a real wake-up call. It was the first accidental, full-scale collision of 2 intact satellites. The U.S. commercial satellite Iridium-33, part of that global communication constellation, collided with a defunct Russian military satellite, Cosmos 2251.
And the impact speed was that devastating 11.7 kilometers per second we talked about.
It was, and this was a wake-up call because it proved that even without deliberate explosions, the orbital environment was already so congested that these accidental collisions were, well, they were inevitable.
And the consequences were huge.
Immense. The incident generated more than 2,000 trackable fragments, spreading a large debris cloud throughout LEO. The impact was so severe that 3 years later, in 2012, the crew aboard the International Space Station had to take mandatory shelter in their docked Soyuz spacecraft until that debris cloud passed.
Which illustrates the direct risk to human safety in orbit.
A direct and immediate risk.
And these close calls are not historical relics. I mean, there are routine occurrences now that demand immediate last-minute evasive maneuvers by operational spacecraft. The proximity in some of the recent incidents is genuinely shocking.
Just consider the encounter in early 2024, February 28th. NASA's timed spacecraft, a mission studying the Earth's atmosphere, had an extremely close pass with a dead Russian spy satellite, Cosmos 2221.
How close are we talking?
Initially, operators estimated the pass was within 20 meters, about 65 feet.
Which is already way too close for comfort at that kind of velocity.
Way too close. But the follow-up analysis revealed the shave was terrifyingly tighter. Less than 10 meters apart.
10 meters.
10 meters. That is well within what they call the hard body parameters of both craft. It means if either one had been slightly off kilter, or if the orbital prediction had been even marginally inaccurate, they would have slammed into each other.
And the NASA officials were pretty shaken by this.
They confirmed that the encounter really scared us all, acknowledging that a collision would have instantaneously created a significant new debris field, threatening not only the ISS, but every subsequent launch into that orbital plane.
This constant risk assessment and maneuvering, it isn't a modern luxury, it's a non-negotiable cost of doing business in space now. And we saw similar urgency nearly a decade ago with NOAA's Suomi MPP mission.
That 2014 incident with Suomi MPP, which is a critical weather and climate observation satellite, it just underscores this constant threat. They detected a piece of debris, estimated to be between 4 inches and over 3 feet in size, heading directly toward the satellite at nearly 17,000 miles per hour.
So what was the projected miss distance on that one?
The initial projection suggested a miss by only 300 feet. And, 300 feet might seem like a large buffer on Earth, but when you consider the speeds involved, traveling at roughly 8 kilometers per second, that buffer is practically non-existent.
So the mission manager had to make a critical call.
They had to. They executed what's called a risk mitigation maneuver, or RMM. The team calculated that had they not moved, the impact velocity would have been nearly 35,000 miles per hour, generating thousands of pieces of new, smaller debris.
So every time a satellite maneuvers, it's costing fuel, it's shortening the mission life.
And it takes time away from its primary mission objective. It's a constant tax on operations.
And all of this evidence leads us to the non-sustainable future, the infamous Kessler Syndrome. The problem isn't just today's risk. It's the self-perpetuating nature of the debris environment.
Right. The concept, which is named after Donald Kessler, it suggests a critical density threshold, a point where the density of objects in LEO is so high that collisions just become inevitable. And each collision generates more debris that then triggers more collisions, leading to a cascade effect.
The runaway chain reaction.
Exactly. Even if we stopped launching new objects today, the problem would continue to grow on its own.
And what kind of impact are we talking about if a large object breaks up?
The breakup of a single large, say, 10-ton satellite, and we have a lot of those old, heavy assets up there, that alone might double or even triple the amount of debris greater than 1 centimeter in LEO. Once that happens, accessing LEO safely becomes prohibitively risky and expensive.
It's like a minefield.
An invisible, high-speed minefield.
And we're already running at a deficit, aren't we? We're adding far more objects than the natural environment can clear out.
The data is stark. There's a model called the Debris Environment Long-Term Analysis, or DELTA, that provides the evidence for this. Let's look at the natural decay rate.
Okay.
Only objects in very low LEO experience significant atmospheric drag, which acts as a sort of natural cleaner, pulling them down. But objects above 800 kilometers might stay in orbit for centuries.
So what does the DELTA model calculate for the actual decay rate?
For objects larger than 10 centimeters in LEO, the natural decay rate is only about 0.15% per year. In real terms, that translates to only about 5 intact objects decaying naturally every year.
5. And how many are we adding?
Well, we are injecting at least 72 new objects into LEO annually at the current global launch rate.
So we add 72 objects, and only 5 come down on their own. That's a net increase of 67 new problems we have to worry about every single year.
Exactly. And at this exponential rate, the Delta model suggests that LEO is not sustainable on a business-as-usual basis, even if we avoided new catastrophic events like the Iridium-Cosmos collision.
History confirms this accelerating rate.
It does. The amount of catalog trackable debris just soared from 5,600 in 1980 to over 16,000 in 2011, and the curve continues upward dramatically today. This confirms that mitigation isn't enough. We need aggressive remediation.
The scientific and technical urgency is so clear, and yet the rules governing space feel like they're stuck in the past. When we look at the legal framework, we're really dealing with a foundation built during a fundamentally different era of geopolitics.
We are talking about laws that were designed for 2 players, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, during the height of the Cold War. The cornerstone is the Outer Space Treaty, the OST, from 1967, and that's supported by 4 subsequent treaties, including the Critical Liability Convention of 1972.
And crucially, these treaties were inherently state-centric.
Completely. Because private activity was, well, it was virtually unimaginable at the time.
And this state-centric framework is now colliding head-on with a world dominated by private mega-constellations. This is where the difficulty of assigning accountability truly begins.
The Liability Convention defines international liability, and it attaches it to the launching state for damage caused by their space objects. But the nature of that liability is a bureaucratic nightmare, and it depends entirely on where the damage occurs.
Okay, so explain the 2 types of liability the convention establishes.
Okay, so if a space object causes damage on the surface of the Earth or to an aircraft in flight, liability is strict. This is absolute liability. You don't need to prove negligence or fault. The mere fact that the damage happened means the launching state is liable.
And there's a precedent for this.
There is. The famous Cosmos 954 incident in 1978. A Soviet satellite scattered radioactive debris across Canada. Canada submitted a claim under the convention, and the Soviet Union eventually settled. It's the only time it's been used.
That seems relatively clear-cut for Earth-based damage. But what happens if the damage occurs in space, like the Iridium Cosmos event?
The rules are drastically different and much weaker. For damage occurring in space, proof of fault is required.
And just think about trying to prove fault in a hypervelocity collision between two spacecraft, both moving at thousands of miles per hour, especially when one of them is non-functional junk.
It's nearly impossible. It is. In the absence of a systematic, impartial space traffic management system, an STM system, that rigorously tracks and mandates maneuvers, how do you establish which object was at fault? Was it a failure to maneuver, a technical failure, an erroneous trajectory prediction?
You can't.
You really can't. The ambiguity essentially neuters the liability convention when it comes to regulating collisions in orbit.
And this liability issue gets even more paralyzing when we start talking about active debris removal, or ADR. I mean, if we launch a removal mechanism and it accidentally causes damage to a third operational satellite, who holds the bag?
This is a major financial inhibitor for any commercial ADR company. Under Article 4 of the Liability Convention, if an ADR operation causes damage to a third party, the launching states of both objects involved are liable.
Both objects. You mean the cleanup ship and the junk it's trying to grab?
Exactly. The removal mechanism and the target derelict object, they will be jointly and severally liable.
So what does that mean in practical financial terms for a small, innovative ADR startup?
It means enormous paralyzing risk. Joint and several liability means that if a UK-based company launches a removal mechanism and the target object belongs to, say, Russia as the launching state, like the defunct Cosmos satellite, the third party that suffered damage can sue either the UK or Russia for the full cost of the damage. And if Russia is uncooperative, or if the original launching state doesn't even exist anymore, the burden falls entirely on the UK and, by extension, on that commercial UK ADR provider.
So the company performing the cleanup essentially inherits the liability of the very debris they are trying to remove.
Precisely. The liability attaches to the launching state, not the ownership. And this massive shared legal risk is a huge deterrent. No commercial entity can afford to take on the potentially unlimited liability of an uncooperative foreign state just to clean up their junk.
And this leads us right to the fundamental legal choke point. The debate over what even constitutes space debris. The original treaties never defined it.
And this is the notorious debris definition dilemma. Legally, none of the foundational treaties define space debris. It simply falls under the broad, legally protected term, space objects.
But we do have technical definitions, right, from organizations like the IADC.
We do, yes. The Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee and UNCOPUOS, they use a technical definition that relies solely on the functional status. Is it broken or is it not working? But this technical definition is, frankly, useless in court.
Why?
Because it conflicts with the core legal principle established by the Outer Space Treaty.
Which is?
That under international law, jurisdiction and control remain attached to the state of registry, irrespective of whether the object is functional or not. The state of registry retains legal sovereignty over its space object, even if that object is just a piece of exploded rocket junk.
So to remove a defunct object, even if it's clearly and obviously junk, you need the explicit consent of the state of registry. If that state says no, or if that state no longer cooperates, you cannot legally touch it.
That is the overriding need we have to address. The international community has to resolve these complex questions of state jurisdiction and control before any large-scale removal or servicing activities can really commence.
So we need a new definition.
We do. Establishing a standardized, legally acceptable definition of space debris that severs that link between state jurisdiction and a non-functional object is cited by experts as an overriding necessity.
The ultimate solution would be a new treaty, a piece of hard law. But consensus is so difficult. Why is the process of generating new space treaties so stalled?
Well, there are two main reasons. First, you have the consensus structure of bodies like the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UNCOPUOS. This means that any single major spacefaring nation can effectively block forward progress if they feel new regulations interfere with their sovereign rights or their military capabilities.
And second,
the geopolitical landscape today is just far more complex than it was in 1967. Getting universal agreement on issues like mandatory liability limits or forced deorbitation is exceptionally difficult to achieve. And this difficulty is exactly what pushes policymakers to favor soft law.
Given that a comprehensive new treaty that defines debris and establishes liability seems, well, politically distant, let's look at the interim solutions. And we need to clearly differentiate between mitigation, which is what we've been focusing on, and remediation, which is what we must start doing.
Mitigation is the past and current strategy. It's about preventing the creation of new debris. This includes things like venting residual fuel to prevent explosions, securing components, trying to avoid collisions during normal operations.
So it's about not making the problem worse.
Exactly. And mitigation has slowed the rate of new debris creation, but it does absolutely nothing for the hundreds of millions of pieces that are already in orbit from 50-plus years of activity.
So remediation is the active cleanup.
Remediation is the necessary future. It is the active removal of existing non-functional space objects. ADR and OOS are no longer optional extras. They are foundational requirements for ensuring the long-term sustainability of Earth orbit, and, critically, for protecting the functional assets we rely on in the short term. The scientific models confirm it. Relying solely on mitigation is a death sentence for orbital sustainability.
And since hard law is stalled, the international community has leaned heavily on soft law, on non-binding rules. Why is this the most effective path right now?
Well, soft law is faster and it's more pragmatic. It includes guidelines, best practices, resolutions that aren't legally binding but reflect a growing international consensus.
And this can become law over time.
It can. Through consistent behavior over time, soft law can evolve into binding customary international law, what lawyers call opinio juris. It allows states to begin operating under new norms of sustainability immediately, which then informs and pressures future binding treaties.
So let's examine the key soft law guidelines we have, starting with the IADC-UN guidelines for mitigation.
Okay, the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, the IADC, developed these, and they serve as the industry standard. They're often integrated as baseline licensing requirements in national space laws, including in the UK.
And what are the key principles?
Well, key principles include defining low Earth orbit as all orbits below 2,000 kilometers, mandates to prevent orbital explosions during the mission, and procedures for limiting objects released during normal operations.
But the most contentious guideline was the deorbit requirement. What was proposed and what was the outcome of that?
The original IADC proposal stipulated that all objects operating in LEO should be removed, either by re-entering the atmosphere or being boosted to a graveyard orbit within 25 years after the end of their mission. This 25-year rule became a major sticking point.
Why was it so controversial that it was rejected?
Many spacefaring nations, particularly those with older space programs, they objected. They saw a high cost and technical difficulty in ensuring removal within that time frame, especially for their large, older rocket bodies.
So it's important to note this rule wasn't actually adopted.
It's a crucial distinction. The 25-year deorbit rule was not adopted by the full UN COPOS when they agreed on the space debris mitigation guidelines in 2007. However, despite the lack of binding adoption, the principle itself has gained widespread traction and is often applied unilaterally by more progressive states.
Moving to remediation, what are the cutting-edge technological concepts being developed to deal with this backlog of existing debris?
Well, the technologies are tailored to the size of the debris. For the tiny, high-velocity fragments, the millimeter-to-centimeter scale people are exploring ground or space-based lasers to slightly ablate the material.
What does that do?
It reduces the object's momentum and just nudges it toward re-entry a bit faster. Other concepts involve deploying these very thin films that would increase the atmospheric drag on the object.
And what about for the large, dangerous pieces, the defunct satellites and the old rocket bodies?
For these large, high-mass objects, we're looking at active capture and deorbitation. The concepts include electrodynamic tethers, which are these long, conducting wires that interact with the Earth's magnetic field.
And that generates a force.
It does. It generates a force that slows the object down, causing it to fall out of orbit naturally over time. It's a fascinating physics-based approach.
It is. And what about the robotics?
Well, there are highly sophisticated robotic technologies. We saw early demonstrations like DARPA's Orbital Express mission way back in 2007. That mission proved that autonomous rendezvous, capture, and even refueling, the basis for on-orbit satellite servicing, is technically feasible.
So these robotic systems are essential for both cleanup and maintenance.
Exactly. They're essential not only for ADR grabbing and dropping dead satellites, but also for OOS, extending the life of operational satellites by refueling or repairing them.
Given the urgency in these technical solutions, why aren't ADR and OOS being implemented widely right now? What are the biggest obstacles?
Our sources highlight two critical and they're intertwined obstacles. The first one is, predictably, funding. ADR is expensive, it's technically complex, and it currently carries a massive financial risk premium, due in part to those liability issues we just discussed.
And the second obstacle is much more geopolitical.
It is. The second and far more complex issue is the concern about alternative uses.
Which means the strategic or military implications of these technologies.
Exactly. If a company develops the capability to rendezvous with, inspect, and safely capture a defunct satellite, that same capability can be used by a military or a state actor to rendezvous with, inspect, or interfere with an operational satellite belonging to a rival state.
The classic dual-use technology problem.
It is. This dual-use nature means that technologies like robotic arms and precise maneuvering capabilities are viewed with immense suspicion by defense ministries around the world.
So it's a catch-22. We need the cleanup technology, but the technology itself poses a security threat if it's not governed properly.
And policymakers are rightly concerned about what happens if these capabilities fall into the wrong hands. We need specific international agreements that address and mitigate these concerns about the alternative uses of servicing and removal technology. Until these strategic uncertainties are addressed and clear rules of the road are established, state funding and regulatory approval for ADR and OOS will remain severely limited.
And one of the potential pathways that gets cited is this idea of unilateral action to generate momentum.
The just do it approach, yeah. Since multilateral agreement is so slow, some experts argue that influential states should just make unilateral declarations. For instance, a major space power could publicly commit to conducting one ADR mission per year by a certain date.
Or commit not to do certain things.
Right. Or unilaterally declare that they will not conduct high-altitude impact tests or commit to providing non-operational data on their defunct assets to everyone. The hope is that as powerful nations establish these norms, consensus will naturally form in a multilateral forum, eventually leading to a more formal agreement.
So let's look at a concrete example of a nation attempting to bridge this regulatory gap. The UK government, recognizing the paralysis at the international level, has put forward a proposal described as a world-first approach to incentivize sustainability within its own national licensing framework.
The UK has correctly identified that the fastest way to drive commercial sustainable behavior is through financial pressure. Their proposal aims to link the core financial mechanisms, specifically liability limits and insurance requirements, directly to an operator's commitment to sustainable practices.
And they do this via a variable liability limit, or VLL, approach.
Exactly.
This sounds like a kind of financial grading system for space citizenship. How does this two-stage variable liability limit mechanism work to incentivize good behavior?
It's designed to be transparent and flexible. So Stage 1 establishes the baseline limit of liability. This limit is determined by two factors. The specific activity the operator is undertaking, is it LEO communications, GEO observation, whatever, and the specific orbital environment where it will take place.
So higher risk activities in more congested orbits get a higher baseline liability limit.
Correct. And then comes Stage 2, where the operator can negotiate that limit down.
This is the incentive part.
This is the incentive mechanism. The operator is assessed across 4 key criteria designed to measure their commitment to sustainability. By scoring points in these criteria, their liability limit is lowered. And since lower liability limits translate directly to lower mandated insurance premiums, this provides a powerful bottom-line financial incentive for operators to invest in sustainability and ADR services.
What are the 4 specific criteria the UK uses to score these operators?
They are minimizing risk through design, minimizing debris generation during operations, minimizing risk post-operations, which is the disposal plan, and the crucial 4th criterion, use of third-party providers to reduce risk.
Okay, let's delve into those points that reward proactive, future-proofing behavior. What earns points under minimizing risk through design?
This criterion rewards things like building a satellite that is modular and standardized. Specifically, points are awarded for designs that facilitate servicing by a third-party on-orbit satellite servicing, or OOS, provider.
Making it easy to refuel or repair or inspect.
Exactly. Or, if the primary deorbit system fails, designing it to be easily captured by a third-party ADR provider. They are literally requiring operators to build ADR capture mechanisms into the satellite design.
And how do they incentivize sharing information during the active phase of the mission?
That falls under minimizing debris during operations. Operators gain points by demonstrating excellent data sharing and engagement protocols. This includes providing detailed, acceptable information about their collision avoidance procedures, their planned maneuvers, and crucially, sharing relevant tracking data with other major operators and third-party providers.
Which brings us to the highest scoring criteria, the use of third-party services.
This is where the UK government is clearly trying to stimulate the commercial ADR and OOS market. An applicant earns the highest possible score, 3 points, under this criterion for having formal contractual arrangements in place with a third-party ADR service provider to remove the satellite at the end of its life.
Or with an OOS provider to extend its mission.
Right. So if a Starlink competitor licenses through the UK, they are financially rewarded for paying a commercial cleanup crew in advance.
It's basically prepaying for your own trash removal.
That's a good way to put it. And even just demonstrating that you are actively engaging in serious discussions and have an established plan is worth 1 point. This signals a clear policy intent. The UK is placing financial weight on remediation solutions, not just vague mitigation promises.
And beyond the VLL, the UK is also investing in government-provided Space Situational Awareness, or SSA, support for its operators, which makes it easier for them to make these complex maneuvering decisions.
That's the Monitor Your Satellites service provided by the UK Space Agency. It's a free digital service designed to standardize and simplify collision warnings for all UK-registered satellite operators. They are synthesizing data that commercial operators would otherwise have to pay a fortune for or attempt to piece together themselves.
And what data sources are they incorporating to provide this analysis?
They pull from U.S. Space Command tracking data, their own UK sovereign sensors, commercial sensor providers who often have greater fidelity than government systems, and ESA's DISCO's object data.
So it's a huge data fusion effort.
It is. This is all fed into a dedicated orbital analysis team that produces proprietary UK-derived analysis, giving operators a single, reliable source of truth.
And how are they evolving this system beyond just a simple alert message?
They're turning it into a decision support tool, which is critical for maneuver planning. The serving is being expanded to provide what they call maneuver trade space plots.
Okay, what does that mean?
Imagine you receive a collision alert. You need to know when to burn your fuel, how much fuel to burn, and how that maneuver affects the rest of your orbital parameters.
That seems like a really complex calculation that the operator currently has to do on their own.
It is. The trade space plots give the operator a visual representation of all the feasible maneuver options. It shows the required fuel consumption versus the resulting missed distance.
So it helps them make a better, faster decision.
A quick, informed decision that minimizes mission downtime and fuel use, maximizing the satellite's useful life while ensuring safety. This capability also serves as hard evidence for operators applying for a VLL score under that data sharing criterion.
We've established the regulatory solutions, but now we have to confront the scale of the challenge that these regulations are facing. The explosive, virtually unregulated growth of the private sector. The control of Earth orbit has fundamentally shifted from nation-states to private entities.
The shift is unprecedented. The global active satellite population is soaring. We're currently sitting at around 9,000 active satellites, and that number grew by approximately 30% in the last year alone.
30% in 1 year.
In 1 year. And the growth is fueled almost entirely by commercial interests focused on these massive broadband constellations.
And one company dominates this environment to an astonishing degree.
SpaceX's Starlink is the elephant in the orbital room. Starlink alone operates well over nearly 5,800 craft of all active satellites orbiting the planet.
But the true scale lies in the turnover.
It does. SpaceX plans to replace 42,000 satellites every 5 years to maintain the technological edge of their constellation.
42,000 replaced every 5 years. That means one company is responsible for injecting and retiring the equivalent of 8,400 satellites annually. That's an industrial scale of activity that those Cold War treaties were just never designed to manage.
And they are not alone. Amazon's Project Kuiper is approved to launch over 3,200 satellites in the coming years. This density and pace create massive governance issues because our regulatory system is just not equipped to handle this volume of private, rapid deployment activity.
One of the immediate problems created by this fragmentation is what's called regulatory shopping companies, choosing the most lenient jurisdiction to operate under.
This is a major accountability threat to global safety. National space laws vary widely. The United States, for example, has comprehensive oversight, but many smaller states, often referred to as flag states, have meager regulatory regimes.
So to reduce costs and accelerate deployment, companies are incentivized to choose the easiest path.
Exactly. The most lenient jurisdictions to license their constellations. They are prioritizing speed and cost savings over global safety standards.
So this choice for less stringent oversight under a flag of convenience undermines the entire premise of international cooperation.
It does. If the UK implements a rigorous VLL system to promote sustainability, but a competitor can license the exact same activity in a jurisdiction with no such requirements, the whole incentive structure collapses.
So what's the proposed fix for this fragmentation?
The primary recommendation is twofold. First, harmonize regulations across as many jurisdictions as possible so regulatory arbitrage becomes less profitable. And second, leverage the power of the launch states.
The countries with the rocket.
Right. Since most satellites are launched from a handful of jurisdictions, the US, China, Russia, the EU, those states should be turned into gatekeepers. They should mandate that any customer launching a satellite from their territory must comply with international guidelines, regardless of the satellite's flag state.
So that would include strong requirements for post-mission disposal and data sharing.
It would have to.
This clash between massive commercial power and weak international regulation has led to some pretty sharp rhetoric from traditional governmental space agencies.
Absolutely. The Director General of the European Space Agency, Josef Aschbacher, stated publicly that due to the sheer volume of assets, Elon Musk is effectively making the rules in space. This is a critical observation. Governance isn't just about treaties anymore, it's about who controls the density and the operating norms of the environment.
And this de facto governance by volume has already led to concrete coordination failures.
The 2020 near collision between a SpaceX Starlink satellite and an ESA Earth observation satellite is a prime example. The ESA satellite had to execute an emergency maneuver to avoid impact.
And SpaceX's reason?
SpaceX later attributed the failure to coordinate to a bug in their automated system and a communication lapse. This incident demonstrates that even automated collision avoidance protocols can fail, highlighting the desperate need for clear, unbiased international norms and a centralized system to manage space traffic to ensure consistency and prevent future confusion.
While U.S. and European commercial interests dominate, we're seeing extreme proposals emerge from developing nations leveraging these commercial partnerships, which throws the resource scarcity issue into sharp relief.
This represents the extreme edge of the new space race. Rwanda, seeking to establish its presence in the space domain, unveiled an astronomical plan to register approximately 330,000 satellites in LEO.
In partnership with the commercial company.
Yes, through a partnership with the French-American satellite company eSpace.
330,000 satellites. That number is genuinely hard to process.
It is. This attempt, which is often viewed cynically as regulatory leveraging, was met with industry alarm. Many analysts questioned Rwanda's technical or financial capacity to monitor, manage, or hold liability for such a massive number of spacecraft.
And it throws the core tension of the Outer Space Treaty right into focus.
It does. Every country has the right to benefit from space activity, but when one flag state enables a single commercial entity to claim hundreds of thousands of slots, it severely limits access for everyone else and accelerates the path to Kessler Syndrome.
Which leads back to the critical question. Is there any consensus on how many satellites low Earth orbit can physically handle before that tipping point is triggered?
Consensus is sorely lacking, and the estimates are wildly divergent. Elon Musk has famously claimed that Earth's orbits can handle tens of billions of satellites, suggesting space is still vast and relatively empty.
And what do independent researchers and analysts say in response to that kind of optimism?
They offer a sobering counterpoint. Analysts relying on close-approach statistical modeling suggest that the Starlink constellation alone, by the end of this decade, may need to undertake well over 1 million changes in position every 6 months.
1 million maneuvers.
Just to avoid existing debris and other operational satellites. If you have to perform 1 million avoidance maneuvers in 6 months, that orbit is inherently non-sustainable.
So what's a more realistic expert estimate for LEO capacity?
Experts generally suggest that LEO could probably handle somewhere between 40,000 and 90,000 satellites, provided that all operators follow extremely stringent, mandatory, and aggressive deorbitation and debris mitigation protocols.
And there's the catch.
There's the catch. The fear is that the tens of thousands of satellites currently slated for launch are being run by operators who have not currently shown the sophistication nor the willingness to show their work and share their work, meaning even the conservative estimates may be too optimistic. The governance problem is thus outpacing the technical problem.
This deep dive has really exposed a fundamental mismatch. We have the technological capability and the emerging regulatory will, like the UK's VLL, to solve the space debris crisis. Yet we are hobbled by a political and legal structure designed for a long-dead era.
That's the summary we have to take away. We know that technical solutions exist. Robotic servicing, ground-based lasers, electrodynamic tethers. And we see progressive states establishing mandatory financial incentives for sustainability. But these mechanisms are paralyzed by these Cold War-era legal ambiguities.
Specifically, the three main obstacles remain.
1. The inability to definitively define space debris separately from a sovereign space object. 2. The difficulty of proving fault under the liability convention for damage that occurs in space.
And 3.
And 3, the financial paralysis caused by that joint and several liability rule, which prevents commercial cleanup efforts because they have to secure consent and inherit the liability of the original, often uncooperative launching state.
And while all this legal maneuvering continues, the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
That delta model confirms that the debris environment in LEO is actively degrading, even without new collisions, confirming the trajectory toward the Kessler Syndrome tipping point.
The urgency cannot be overstated. We need an immediate global transition from mitigation guidelines to aggressive remediation strategies. The longer we delay resolving the legal status of defunct space objects, the closer we get to a catastrophic cascade effect that would jeopardize future access to space for everyone.
The Outer Space Treaty defines space as the province of all mankind, ensuring universal access and benefit. If access to space is essential for modern economic, environmental, and military security, this domain is a global commons.
It is.
But when the orbital domain is increasingly becoming the exclusive province of a few commercially dominant actors, with one company operating over 50% of all active satellites and dictating the pace of replenishment, how can the international community truly ensure that universal access and shared benefit?
That is the ultimate challenge. The current liability regime requires national governments to authorize and supervise private actors to hold them accountable. But if powerful commercial space companies are allowed to continue leveraging lax flag states through regulatory shopping, the international community's ability to enforce sustainability and therefore protect space as a global commons, it just vanishes.
So we are watching a choice unfold in real time.
We are. Will the final frontier be governed by a coordinated international law, prioritizing universal access, or will it simply be governed by the economic power and operational volume of the biggest commercial players? That choice will define the next 50 years in space.
A profoundly necessary deep dive. We hope you feel much more informed and perhaps a little more motivated about the incredible challenge and the necessary solutions for the final frontier. That's it for this edition of The Deep Dive.